When we tear down a building that is 100, 150, or 200 years old, the materials that went into these buildings are not just trash. In many cases, the trees that were used for lumber are either extinct or can no longer be harvested anymore. Instead of being carted off to the landfill, they can be recycled into any number of new projects, from new buildings to a one-of-a-kind custom piece of furniture, or as I'm going to show you, into a simple picture frame. The first step in building this picture frame was to select my lumber. I chose to use old-growth heart pine and Brazilian rosewood for an accent. I got most of the lumber for this project from a house that was being torn down across the street from where I live. It was really easy to get my hands on the materials. All I had to do was go up and talk to the contractor and just ask him for what I wanted, and he was more than happy to let me have anything that I wanted that would end up in the dumpster otherwise. He even had me bring up my trailer and had his guys load it for me. The second step is to prep the lumber. Now, to do this, the first thing you want to do is to remove any old nails or screws or anything that isn't wood. So you want to be sure to get all the nails and screws out, even ones that may be buried beneath the surface of the lumber that you can't easily see. Because when you go to cut the lumber, if a saw were to hit a piece of a nail or a screw that is left in the wood, this could cause some serious kickback and could pose some serious health hazards to you. The second thing you want to do is to sand the lumber. Now, when doing this with old lumber, you want to be sure you use a full face respirator with a HEPA filter. This will prevent any lead dust from lumber that might have old lead paint on it from being breathed in. And the third step in prepping the lumber is to dimension all four sides. Now, to do this, I used a couple of power tools I have, being a joiner and a planer, and this made it rather easy for me to do. The third step is going to be to dimension the lumber. Now, this is simply just cutting the lumber to the sizes that you need, which would be the length of these two side slats and the top and bottom pieces. The fourth step was to cut this dado in the back. And I cut this in here so that the glass, the picture, and the backing for it will all sit flush with the back of the picture frame and it won't stick off the wall. The fifth step was to fit all the joints together and do any tweaking as necessary to get a good snug fit. The sixth step is to test clamp everything together. And this is just clamping everything together as you would if you were gluing it, but without glue, to make sure everything holds square when you apply pressure from the clamps. The seventh step is to glue the frame together, clamp it overnight, and let it set for at least 24 hours for the glue to fully cure. The eighth step, which is entirely optional, was I cut and fit these Brazilian rosewood splines across all four of the joints. And this just adds a decorative touch and a little extra strength to the joints. The ninth step is sanding. And for sanding, first I sanded with 80 grit, then I moved to 150 and 220 grit. And when sanding, you want to be sure to use something flat to hold the sandpaper against the work surface. That way you don't cut grooves where the pressure from your fingers would apply more pressure to the surface. You also want to make sure that you sand with the grain. That way you don't see scratches in the finish when you're done. And the 10th and final step was finishing. Now, for finishing of this project, I chose to use a 3-step application of a hand-rubbed poly. And All that means is I just applied 3 coats of poly, rubbing it into the wood by hand with a rag, almost in a manner sort of polishing it. And then once that fully cured, after the last coat for about 48 hours, I came back with 2000 grit sandpaper, 2000 grit wet dry sandpaper, and I wet it down with a little bit of water and just polished the surface out to 2000 grits so I could get that shine and luster I wanted from the wood. Now I chose to just build a simple picture frame for this demonstration, but the amount of projects that can be created from reclaimed materials are almost as limitless as the warmth and charm of the materials themselves.